So we've had a great look back. We listened to some of the farmers who had the intestinal fortitudes and the stick-to-itiveness to stick through the tough times and the vision about where they might be going. And this organization is no different. This is a reflection of those visionary farmer leaders. They took some risks, and they made an investment. So that's the purpose of this panel today. We're going to highlight where we are today and kind of what we're thinking about for the future. So, you know, I loved, Krista Harden may have the most used quote here today. She said, you know, we can look at the past, just don't stare. Well, we're not staring. I guarantee you, this team, and I'm going to use the word team because Wade said it, you know, as family, you can fuss and fight and squabble, but as a team, you have to work together. We might get a little of that fussing and fighting from time to time because that's just good debate. But we pulled together as a team. We've assembled a great team here at ISA, and this is just a small representation of the senior leadership that really make ISA work like a finely oiled machine. So I'd like to make some introductions and just wave as your name is mentioned. Ed Anderson, our Senior Director of Supply and Production Systems. Carol Balvance is our Director of Policy. Grant Kimberly, our Director of Market Development and the Executive Director of the Iowa Biodiesel Board. So Grant's one of those two-hat guys. Aaron Petsy, he's our Director of Communications and External Relations. Mike Steenhoek is the Executive Director of the the Soy Transportation Coalition, of which Iowa is one of the 12 states that goes together to really work on comprehensive transportation issues. And Roger Wolf, who's our Director of Environmental Programs and Services. So we're going to have a conversation today. We're going to have a conversation with the staff, and I'd like for you to be part of the conversation. There are cards on the tables. There's going to be quite a bit of time for Q&A, and so write your questions down. We have Producer Services is over here on the side, and Heather Lilienthal, they've raised their hands. They will come and collect your questions, and Heather will help sort those questions, and we'll have this be just a conversation. So I'm going to use this mic, and there are handheld mics that you can pass around. Okay, great. Yeah. So, but Ken, we just roll with it, right? Yeah. So, Kate, can we go to the next slide? So over the last year or so, we've had a task force of farmer leaders and senior leaders here on staff to work on a new strategic plan. We did an exhaustive, what we called environmental scan, looking at all those things that can influence the soy complex, whether it's agronomic, whether it's international. And there are lots of those outside influences. And then what can we do about it at Iowa Soybean Association, and how can we influence those things? So we had a strategic plan that we put together that's a one-page strategic plan. There was I guess I don't have that visual, but it boiled down to this goal statement: to improve the competitiveness of Iowa soybean farmers. How do we do that? How do the programs that we have at Iowa Soybean Association improve the competitiveness? So let's talk about that. Ed, we have a huge history of investing in research. So the research portfolio at Iowa Soybean Association is pretty diverse. So talk about how the research portfolio really influences and helps the competitiveness of Iowa soybean farmers.
Well, thank you, Carrie. And can everybody hear me? I'm going to answer the question, but just if my esteemed colleagues and dear friends here will allow me just one quick second. I get to be first so I can say this. I knew coming into today that this would be an exciting day, but I really had no idea how wonderful the morning session would be, and you guys before us did a fabulous job. I can't relate, Ray, to what it was like to be a farmer during the 80s, but I can tell you what it's like to be a kid of a farmer during the 80s. So, good job, great job. And I promise that's the only time I'll get a little choked up today. So, a couple of years ago, I had the chance to come to ISA, and Kirk has received a lot of well-deserved kudos today, and I'd like to recognize Carrie as well, because Carrie and Kirk and the many big shoulders that we stand on that developed this organization and continue to lead this organization gave me a great opportunity to come and lead the research efforts. And one of the things that sold me most on the opportunity was when Carrie said, we really want you to focus on collaboration, communication, and integration. And that's been my passion for my entire career. And even though I only look like I'm 20, I've actually been around for a long time, right? So I want to talk a little bit about how we, as part of the strategic plan, and are focused on competitiveness and driving competitiveness for our farmers, our stakeholders, is impacted, hopefully, in a very positive way by the research that we do. So many are familiar with the On-Farm Network, and our current leader of the On-Farm Network is Pat Rieg, and Pat is an absolute delight to work with, and he does a phenomenal job of leading the On-Farm Network. You'll hear from Roger, but you won't hear Roger talk as much about the EPS program, the environmental programs and services programs, as you'll hear him talk specifically about nutrients and nutrient management, water quality, and sustainability today. So I want to highlight the environmental programs as well and the great work that they've done for many, many, many years. And then when we took on the opportunity to integrate the two programs in the last couple of years, we formed a group led by Peter Kaverga, who was already a part of the association, but to really head up our analytics group. And so we focus Peter's efforts on providing support. His group provides support in analyzing all of the wonderful data and all of the huge data sets that the On-Farm Network generates and that the environmental programs and services teams generate, as well as our partnerships with Iowa State University and others, to really help make that data useful information to farmers and bring back results to farmers in an individual and in an aggregated way to help drive them forward in being competitive and however you define competitiveness. In addition to that, when I came to the Soybean Association, Kirk Leeds came to me and said, I want you to really focus on working with our friends at Iowa State on developing an Iowa Soybean Research Center. And so we've had the pleasure of working with Wendy and Greg Tilke and Kendall Lamke and many others at Iowa State. Thomas Baum is here in the audience, and really developing, and I think we've got not only approval, but some real traction on the Iowa Soybean Research Center. Another opportunity to bring farmers and industry and our commodity groups together to drive forward in a very focused and aggressive way the research that we want to bring to the benefit of farmers. And lastly, I get to work with both the USB, the United Soybean Board, and more closely with the North Central Soybean Research Program to integrate on a multi-state level to bring the good stuff that ISA is doing to the good things that others are doing with our checkoff funded dollars for research. So sorry I took too long, but thank you.
And can I just say that this coordination really helps us be way more efficient with farmers' dollars, but it helps farmers become more efficient as they learn new tools and learn how to use the data in their own way. So, yeah. So Roger, we talk about improving the competitiveness of Iowa soybean farmers. The word sustainability has cropped up in many conversations. It means many different things to many different people. You work in this space every day. Water quality is another one of those things that's kind of tied to sustainability, but it's also front and center in urban areas. So talk a little bit about your focus, not just what your team does, but your focus on sustainability and water quality.
Well, thanks, Carrie. It's a great pleasure to really work for an association like this, and I really embrace the word sustainability. I always have embraced it, and what I like to celebrate on this issue is that Iowa Soybean Association and Iowa soybean farmers have been at the forefront of leadership, and it was reflected. Krista reflected on it. You should be proud of that, and it's such a pleasure to work for such a committed organization. And, I like to tell people that we have no problem defining the word sustainability. We've been in that business. Agriculture's been in that business historically. Our ISA strategic plan, Objective 1, 2, 3, it's about productivity, profitability, efficiency. Efficiency and profitability go together. Productivity and profitability go together. Natural resource practices and environmental quality. And boom, we got it. You can't have sustainability if you don't have all that. And that's our message. But we also have to have data and information because farmers are faced with making decisions. We have variable landscape, we have a variable climate. Farmers know this first and foremost, firsthand. And so we apply science, we apply data and information to help us understand the risks because decisions have to be made. Decisions on the farm have to be made. These are significant investments that farmers make in this space. So as part of the research program at ISA, integration comes natural to us. What we're doing is we're blending production management practices in a variable landscape with science, data, and information that results in profitable decision making. We can tell that story. We have to have data and information for decision making on farms, but we also have to have data and information so that we can communicate that to non-ag people, people in the supply chain. So it really comes as a natural thing to us. And one last thing, Carrie, 25 years ago, I was starting my career, and I attended a no-till conference. 25 years ago, we were at the front end of implementing conservation compliance plans. And if you had C and D slope land and you grew corn and beans, you had no-till in your conservation plan. And we had farmers saying, I've never no-tilled, right? We didn't know a lot about it. There were some leaders. There were leaders, what are the old buffalo tillage implements, right? Guys started out, and I didn't know how to no-till. I'd never no-tilled in my life, but yet I was working with farmers in my career telling them that they had to no-till, right? But I went to an ISA conference at Iowa State University. 1,000 farmers were there. Panels of farmers up front that were trying to make no-till work. And when I listened to those farmers, I learned a lot about no-till, but I saw other farmers learning. And suddenly I saw the power of association and leadership. And ISA had a big impact on me 25 years ago. And then I got to become part of this movement. So it's my pleasure to do it. We got a great staff. They can't all be up here. I want to recognize those folks on my staff because they're the ones with the capacity and capability helping all the farmers across the state continue to be leaders on this. So thanks.
Thanks, Roger. So, Grant, Roger mentioned the supply chain. So you work a lot with customers internationally that are buying boatloads of soybeans. You also work in the biodiesel area, so you're working with manufacturers. So talk a little bit about how you focus on improving the competitiveness of Iowa soybean farmers, because as it's been mentioned here before, every other row gets exported. That's a huge part of our competitive advantage, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a great story to tell, and for the area that I deal with most, it's these guys are helping us grow more soybeans and better soybeans, and it's my job and the people that I work with to help sell these beans and all the products related to it. And it really starts with building that demand base and then focusing on the customer preference side of it and how this all ties back together. Sustainability and telling that story is all part of that process. And as we understand the customer's needs and they become where they want more and more information, they definitely want to ensure that the soybeans that we are growing are sustainably grown and they're sustainably sourced. And so that's where understanding that customer need, developing those relationships, and that's really what it comes down to, especially the opportunity that I've had to travel many different places around the world and meet with all the different soybean buyers in different places. It comes down to relationships, and they want to understand how we do things. They want to meet the people that are doing it, meet the growers like you guys out there, and that means something to them because they recognize Iowa and U.S. soybean farmers as the best growers in the world. And so all we have to do is just maybe be a little bit better about telling that sustainability message and the story of what we're doing, and that we're starting to do that now. And I think that's what we had to do to understand that customer preference. And it's the same way in any of the other products that we work with, like biodiesel. Places like California is developing a low carbon fuel standard. And as they do that, they want to ensure that the feedstock that goes into biodiesel is also sustainably produced and meets certain greenhouse gas emissions. So those are very important, and we're making efforts to educate the Californians as well. In some cases, we've had California groups come here specifically related to that topic, and I said that's much like a trade mission as well. It's a bit of a foreign country at times, but nonetheless, they're very critical when it comes to the biodiesel industry. It's a huge market, 700 million gallon potential for biodiesel in that market. So we have to engage all up and down the supply chain with our partners in the biodiesel industry, and then also our partners overseas. And that's the other key. We got to look at them as partners, not just customers.
Correct. Thanks, Grant. So, Mike, you know, we've heard it said, many people in this room have said, you know, U.S. farmers have the competitive edge over South America because of our transportation system. So you work every day, you wake up every day thinking about how can we improve the transportation system, how can we get some things done that we want to get done. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, when I look at that goal statement, improve the competitiveness of Iowa farmers, it really, to me, is a function of being able to do that is really a function of, can we get what our customers want to them? First of all, can we get what they want to them, and can we get it to them in the way that they want it, how they want it, and when they want it, superior to the alternatives? And if we can do that, we will be competitive. If we cannot do that, we will not be competitive. And historically, soybean organizations, a lot of agricultural organizations really occupied themselves with the supply and the demand components of the profitability equation. If we simply stimulate supply and if we simply stimulate demand, we will therefore be profitable. Well, in the 1950s, when my parents were growing up on farms in Prairie City and Monroe, transportation, while it was important, wasn't as consequential to the profitability of the American farmer. Why? Because so much of what was produced on the farm was either retained on the farm, fed to the livestock that you had residing on your farm, or it was consumed within a pretty close proximity to the farm. So if your customer is located next door, transportation isn't that important. If your customer is located halfway around the world, it becomes critical. It becomes essential to your profitability. And so I thought it made a lot of sense when I was first acquainted with the fact that Iowa Soybean Association and a collection of other states decided to create the Soy Transportation Coalition. I like to say routinely, we talk a lot about outcompeting the rest of the world, doubling exports over the next few years. And a lot of times when we talk about outcompeting the rest of the world, the discussion centers on innovation. If we out-innovate other countries, we will outcompete other countries. Well, one of the messages I try to transmit is sometimes outcompeting the rest of the world, yes, it indeed is a function of out-innovating, but sometimes it's simply a function of out-delivering. Taking a product that can be produced elsewhere, and while we, I think, reasonably can say that the U.S. grows the best soybeans in the world, they can grow quality soybeans in South America. But what has been the secret is our ability to get it from point A to point B more cost effectively and reliably than our competitors can. When you look at where soybeans are grown in the United States, if it's a river movement down to New Orleans in southern Louisiana, that's about a 1,000-mile journey. If it's going to the Pacific Northwest, that's about a 1,400 to 1,500-mile journey. When you look at the distance from growing regions to export regions in the United States compared to Argentina and Brazil, the U.S. should be the least economical on the international marketplace. We are the most economical. We are the most reliable because of our system of inland waterways, freight rail, highways and interstates, roads and bridges. And so we need to keep our our foot on the pedal for that to make sure that we continue to maintain that competitive advantage with transportation. If we don't, we will cease to be competitive.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron, Roger mentioned that we needed to communicate with urban areas about water issues, for instance. You, the Director of Communication, think about these freedom to operate, also a term that I'm sure probably wasn't used in those early days of the Iowa Soybean Association, but you think about, and your team executes programs related to consumer education on what we do on the farm. It's part of that social license, that freedom to operate kind of messages that we need to have out there with consumers. So share a little bit about what you're doing.
There's not an issue, there's not one thing that farmers are involved in that isn't impacted by someone who isn't. And that's a very startling fact when you consider that less than 2% of people are directly involved in agriculture. That means there is a sizable audience who can directly influence each and every day what farmers do. That is that social license, that freedom to operate. And all you have to do is look at ballot initiatives involving labeling, or look at just the siting of a new livestock barn, or look at the approval of traits and technology. Look at all of the issues that are swirling about us right now. And the people who don't farm are increasingly making their voice heard. Now, I think what has really changed some of the dynamics is that they often say that first seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And we are doing a much better job of listening in agriculture to what is on the minds and what's on the hearts of the 98% of people who don't farm. And I joined the ISA team 4 years ago this month. Seems like it's been about 4 weeks. You know, time flies when you're having fun, even when you're working with Carol Ballvance.
The ISA building, yeah. It seems like the ISA building's in a different time zone. It moves at warp speed, right?
It really does. And, you know, I'm so privileged to work with 10 tremendous communicators. If you hear keys clicking, if you hear a shutter clicking, especially if it's Matt Wildy typing, I can hear the clicking up here. We have a tremendous communications team, and they're on point in not only delivering news about soybean farming and agriculture to our members and to soybean farmers, but we're increasingly in that consumer space as well. And credit to the ISA in January of 2011 for launching the Iowa Food and Family Project. And I remember I'd been on board for 2 months, and Kirk calls me into the boardroom. It was the first board meeting after I had started there. And he says, Aaron, you will pitch the Iowa Food and Family concept to the ISA Board of Directors. And he said, no pressure, but you know, if they don't approve it, you'll have the shortest career in the history of ISA. It was almost that bad. But I remember after giving the pitch about launching the Iowa Food and Family Project and the resources it would take to do that, there was a pause at which time questions were asked for or comments from the board. And there's a gentleman sitting out here just to my left that I've spotted. Jim Andrew was the first to raise his hand, and I thought to myself, oh Lord, I hope that the opening comment following my pitch of funding the Iowa Food and Family is a positive one. And thank goodness, Jim raised his hand. He says, you know, I think this is something we've got to do. I vote to approve funding to get this thing launched, and it was history from that point forward. And there's people in the room who launched the Iowa Food and Family. I know Jim Hallahan and our friends with the Iowa Games and the Iowa Sports Foundation. Governor Branstad was part of that. And it's made a tremendous impact positively on the trust and the confidence that people have in today's farms and food system, and it's a privilege to be part of that effort.
You know, and I think that's a sign that the farmer leaders at Iowa Soybean Association have gone with their gut. You know, they farm by pert and near, as my friend Ray Gasser says. You know, we know where we need to go, so we're gonna trust our gut and we're gonna take some risks. So, Carol, this social license, this freedom to operate, also comes in the policy area. Regulations, policy, it all matters. Not only are consumers asking us to do things, but policymakers are asking us to do things as well without much information. So share about what you do working with legislative and policymakers.
Well, as you all know, politics is a contact sport. And as of late, there have been some people that have felt a little bruised by
She usually
politics.
wears shoulder pads.
Those are great. At any rate, Iowa Soybean Association likes to participate probably in a little bit different way than some of the other associations. Number one, we don't have a PAC, and I would also give kudos to the board that decided that maybe a PAC wasn't the best thing to have, and I'll let that die where it dies. But the second thing that we do is while you're all worrying about, and we constantly have 50 issues front and center that this might happen, we try to keep an eye on the far horizon, because that far horizon is going to have those issues that kind of just surface and bob there. And you have to think about them and really look at them for a while to determine, are these going to impact agriculture or not? How is this issue going to play in the future? And we really have to study those. When they do appear that, this is going to have some impact, and we tested them under a number of studies. We go talk to people. We talk to Ray Gasser and Ron Heck and say, is this something that's going to have legs? Is this something that's going to bite us later on? And once we determine it does, and we do our research, we do our study, then we take the second step, which we have gotten pretty good at, and that's developing relationships. Grant said it too. We have a great lobbyist, Jill Altringer, who's at the State House. I take a great group of farmers to DC every spring and in the summer. And it's having those relationships with the staffers, with the legislators, with the governor's office, those kinds of things where we can share information. As I said, we don't have PAC money, but I've got a tremendous team of people up here who are constantly developing information that we can share, and we can trot out and say, oh, you want to understand more about water quality? I'll bring you Roger Wolf. I'll bring you Ed Anderson to come down and talk to the legislative committee about the value of spending checkoff dollars at Iowa State University or at any of these places that need research money. We can do those things because we've got the relationships, we've got the contacts, and we've got the good information. Now, discerning which issues really need to be talked about is probably the toughest part. And I'll give you a good example. I would be willing to bet that when you first heard the idea that California was going to pass a law about chicken cages and the size they needed to be, most of us said to ourselves, just an animal rights issue, not a big deal. Now, Congressman King understood, and I think a lot of people along with him looked at that and said, yeah, well, eggs and chickens in Iowa, that's a pretty big deal. And it's also going to impact feed sales. And you know what, if they do it the way they're going to do it, it's going to impact the way states do business with one another. Maybe this is something we should push back on. That's the kind of thinking that we need to do, the thinking that goes deeper, the thinking that goes beyond, does this issue impact me today, here and now? Because if it's going to impact us down the road, that's what we need to be thinking of, even if it's 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Somebody asked me the other day, are you guys going to have a Farm Bill study team again? And I said, well, it's 5 years down the road, but it's probably time to start thinking about it because somebody's out there starting to think about it. So our process is pretty simple. We bring the issue up, we vet it in front of the farmers, we have them talk about it, we think about it really hard, we talk to the decision makers that we think could make a difference with the issue, and from there on, it's up to the farmers how far it goes. Usually, we have a pretty good track record.
And while Aaron's team works a lot with talking to consumers, you're talking to urban legislators. You've developed a program that's gotten a lot of notice and been very successful. Adopt an urban legislator, and so legislators have been going out to farms. Many of you in this room have adopted an urban legislator, and I think that's part of that freedom to operate message that help people that are making decisions understand what we're doing. So, and I'd like to remind you that we'll have time for questions and answers, so jot down your question and get them to the producer services team that's out there working the crowd. So our next question, and I hate to just go down, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll start taking questions from you, but you all are leaders. You have the opportunity to network with thought leaders in many arenas in agriculture. You've traveled, you've seen a lot of things related to agriculture. So my question is, quickly, what keeps you up at night? As you think about the next 10 or 15 years, what's your biggest concern for agriculture, Iowa soybean farmers? And maybe it's what's the game changer that you see on the horizon? So, one of those, talk about those two things. Ed?
Thank you, Carrie. For me, the game changer and the frustration, or the thing that keeps me up at night, is all centered on technology. And I love technology, and I love innovation and creativity, and I like to be surrounded by people who are. And Carol, thanks for saying that. I certainly agree about our colleagues here and all of the folks, farmers associated with ISA. Going back to Ken's presentation before the panel just before us, I didn't get a farm, but I did get to go in '87, and I was part of that field group that put out those first tests with Monsanto. And if you'd have told me almost 30 years later that we'd still be dealing with some of the GMO issues and the concerns and the threat of labeling and some of those things around a technology that has so much potential, and we're still really in the first generations of that technology. We could be in the second or third generation by now, and that's a surprise. That's a concern for me. We need to figure out, and we need to continue to figure out how to be better educators, better at working with our urban friends and helping them to understand what the value is of that technology, how much it's already brought. There are other technologies too, right? We have ISA as part of the Ag State program in Iowa. We have really participated a lot over the last 10 months in the big data topic. We've worked on what we're now trying to call digital farming and the transformation of agriculture through data and the ability to analyze and make use of that data. That's a thrill, but it's also a lot of concern. And who's going to own the data, and how are we going to maintain our rights as farmers, and how are we as an organization going to help communicate and train farmers in leveraging the data that either the on-farm or the environmental programs and services groups generate, or Iowa State or others, to their own advantage personally and in an aggregated way to them broadly, and still allow them the freedom to operate that they need. Lots of other technologies and opportunities that are also kind of scary out there. And I appreciate the opportunity to work in an association that has such a good communications group, policy group, farmer leaders, that give us a chance to talk through how to address those challenges, those issues, and move forward.
Roger?
Same question?
Yeah, what keeps you up at night?
Well, my staff knows I get up about 3 a.m. So
I think I've gotten the emails from you then.
I get up in the middle of the night quite frequently. So the buck that got away. Well, one thing is this. You've asked us to be leaders, and I have to push these issues. I have to be ahead of the current thinking in order to have a leadership perspective. Believe me, I get up in the middle of the night thinking about what's coming. How can I be relevant to farmers? And guess what? I got to also figure out how to communicate it in such a way that I don't scare the daylights out of you, right? So I'm going to tend to move you out of your comfort zone. And how are we going to find that innovative leadership position on these topics? At the same time, what's the game changer? And I agree with Ed. I'm a sucker for technology and innovation, and because I believe in it. Because I think we have tremendous capabilities and capacity to do so much better. We've proven our abilities to do that. Your grandfathers transitioned this landscape to what it is today. That's now worth $250 billion. That's the land asset value. A $40 billion ag industry. That's all the ag industries, not just soy. And we have a variable climate. We go from drought, we go to extreme rain events. We have to be more productive, so we got to take big data, and we got to take small data. We got to make sense of that data. We got to manage risk. Okay, we got to do this whole sustainability thing. You want to produce 100 bushel soybean, we got to do it efficiently, sustainably. And so we got to realize that for the next generation, the next 50 years. That's the business we're in. I get up in the middle of the night worrying about the leadership question. And how am I going to work with my board? And how is that investment going to be leveraged? How are we going to operationalize it? How are we going to continue to be leaders in this space? That's what wakes me up.
Well, good luck with that, Grant. You're next.
I think he just answered it. We're done, I think.
But Grant, you work with, like I said, you work with a lot of our buyers, and so you hear their concerns as well. But you're also a farmer, so what keeps you up at night?
Well, it depends what I'm thinking about. I mean, actually, I think Ken said it right. What really keeps me up at night, at least this one time, was ice cubes in China. But other than that, in a bigger picture sense of the word, definitely, I mean, China does keep me up at night. While they're a great market opportunity, it's been, that's been the big demand driver and story for soybeans, and I think it will continue to be for quite a while. But being that dependent on one market is also scary. When they're buying, just under maybe a third of all the soybeans grown in the United States, that's something to be concerned about when they can make decisions, policy changes, as Ron talked about earlier and Ray, on a whim because maybe they want to protect their domestic market. That's concerning, definitely. And then also on the other side of the coin here domestically, the other big demand driver for us, besides our longstanding relationship with the livestock industry, which has been great, but also the renewable fuels industry and the RFS, and how that's also dependent on the whims of certain people in power. And if something would happen there that would pull the rug out from underneath that market and that industry, that would be devastating. So certainly that keeps me up at night. The game changer, though, I think, is that even though we do have those major demand drivers, there's great demand for soybeans. There's great demand for protein around the world. The world needs protein, and it's going to continue to need protein. And that's going to continue to drive, I think, opportunities for our industry. And places like India maybe becomes the next big market. I still think we're probably a ways away from that. They're just a little different dynamics there, but I think a matter of time where maybe that is an opportunity.
Yeah, so Mike, if Grant would share his mic, there you go. So Mike, game changer, and what keeps you awake at night? I think, we've talked about, are they two different things? Are they the same thing? Share your thoughts.
Well, I could point to a very strategic lock and dam that if that were to go out of service during harvest season, it would really have seismic effect on the profitability of the ag industry. So, that's certainly kind of a near term. But I think that the bigger, more looming concern is more systemic in this country, and it really points to our leadership or lack thereof. I think the United States can accurately be described as a spending nation, not an investing nation. There's a big difference between the two. We used to have more of an investment mentality. So much of the infrastructure that provides that an expeditious journey from point A to point B, even if point B is halfway around the world, a lot of those investments were made, decades ago. We need to recapture that investment mentality, but unfortunately, we seem to have a government at pretty much all levels, federal, state, and local, that really seems ill-equipped to do the things that the ag industry, but the broader economy needs to get done. I remember when I used to work on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and I'd often think to myself about Washington, D.C., I know of no other place where so much gets done but so little accomplished. And so we really, and so agriculture, I think, has a real role to play in really transmitting that story that do we want to be a country that consumes from the rest of the world, or do we want to be a country that produces for the rest of the world? And even those who don't have much of a touch point with, experience with, maybe they've never met a farmer, they still aspire for the United States to be one of those places, to be a place that still produces and makes things. You've got to have transportation in order to make that happen. So that's the big thing that keeps me awake at night. As far as potential game changers, I think the whole notion of as things are getting bigger, things are simultaneously contracting. We work in an industry that your customer is located halfway around the world, so the world is your customer base is getting bigger, but then there's this desire on the part of our customer to know where their food comes from. And historically, within agriculture, including the soybean industry, the goal was essentially to produce as much as you can and get it from point A to point B at the lowest cost. And that really satisfied customer demand. Now, our customers are kind of moving up this hierarchy of values. They not only want a commodity at a low price, but they also want to know where it's coming from. And they not only want to buy it from Iowa, but they also want to buy it from you, a particular farmer. So we're seeing some of these barriers that historically have prevented that from happening. Technology has prevented that from happening historically. We're seeing those things go away. We're able to have relationships between farmers and our customers. So it'll be interesting to see, our farmers, do they kind of move up getting closer and closer to that ultimate transaction that happens with our customers around the world, capturing more of that value, even doing more direct marketing of what they produce instead of just occupying this one limited space in the overall ag profitability equation.
And we're seeing multi-million-dollar companies, billion-dollar companies that are also wanting to do that very thing. So the supply chain is certainly changing. Aaron, same question to you.
I would say it's the enormity of the issues and how fast rumor and speculation can travel that keeps me up at night. These issues are constantly evolving. The voices are constantly changing. Woody Harrelson is now an expert on food production, and there are food summits being held where there's not a farmer at the table. That's scary, and that should keep all of us up. And I think it should also be a call to action, and that's the flip side. And what I can't wait to get out of bed to do is to do what we're doing at the Iowa Soybean Association, and that is to communicate the association's commitment to improving the competitiveness of Iowa's soybean farmers and Iowa agriculture, while at the same time better acquainting Iowans with how their food is grown and the farm families who grow it. The game changer, I don't know if we need to look to the future for that. I think the Iowa Soybean Association and the 40 partners who are involved in the Iowa Food and Family Project, including every commodity organization in Iowa, can look at the Iowa Food and Family Project as a game changer. We just did our annual Consumer Pulse survey of 350 Iowans. These are Iowans who 75% are female, making the majority of the food purchasing decisions for their household, highly educated, very affluent. And we saw this past year, from September of 2013 to September of 2014, we saw a 6% increase among Iowans who said that they were more confident this year than last year in what farmers are doing, and they were 9 points more confident that farmers are environmental stewards. What's even more, I think, to the point about Iowa Food and Family and the vision of the Iowa Soybean Association is that we saw awareness of the Iowa Food and Family Project among these food-minded Iowans increase from 25% to 31%. Why does that matter? Because when we looked at the crosstabs and we looked at the Iowans who were familiar with Iowa Food and Family and those who weren't, those who were 11 points more trusting of how farmers are caring for their livestock, 10 points more trusting that farmers are environmental stewards, and a whopping 15% more confident that the changes that are taking place in agriculture are good for them, good for Iowa, and good for the communities in which food is grown. That's a game changer. There are states and there are organizations across this country that have been sitting under fluorescent lights for 2 decades, wondering how do we move the needle in terms of the public or the food-minded community's trust and confidence in what we as farmers are doing in 2014. We're doing that, and it's a testament to the vision and the leadership of ISA, now joined by nearly 40 partners of the Iowa Food and Family Project.
Thanks, Aaron. Carol, same question to you. And then we're going to come to questions from the audience. And I don't see Heather. Okay, very good. Carol.
Well, other than calves coming in the middle of the night or sheep being born, nothing much keeps me up at night because I sleep very well. I bought a Tempur-Pedic bed, and it's the best thing I ever did.
Are they a sponsor of the Food
No,
and
but
Family
they should be. Yeah, you should all have one. I would say, listening to my colleagues here, all these issues are really, really important. But once again, I go back probably a little bit backwards and go to a very basic issue. I don't watch much TV, but I do get to see NCIS once in a while, and I really like Agent Gibbs because he always follows his gut. And my gut issue, the issue that is my bottom line game changer, is private property rights. If it's going to impact private property rights, then I'm thinking about it. It's one of those issues. If I run an issue through my traps and I say, yeah, that's a private property rights issue, then that's probably going to be something I'm making some phone calls about. Now, the most recent issue probably that we've had is the Waters of the U.S. rule, which many people, many organizations luckily jumped in on and said, you know, this is probably a lot less about water quality and a lot more about controlling land. And as we looked at that issue, you know, and I think Congress even agreed with it, it does have an impact of private property rights to it. I'm afraid that farmers, in dealing with everything we have to deal with every single day, and I've got a farmer husband, so I know if the fence needs fixing or somebody's out and doesn't need to be out, we've got a lot of minutia to deal with. But, you know, the bottom line is we've got to keep our eyes on private property rights, because if we lose them, or if we give them away a little at a time because it's expedient, or because somebody wants our data, or somebody wants to give us this if we'll just do this, we give those private property rights away, we end up with very little to sell or to transport or to research about. Private property is the basis for our economic well-being. Now, I'm a lot older than everybody else up here on this stage. In fact, Ray and I kind of share a birthday year. Don't tell him when it is, Ray, okay? 26. Yeah, we are. But I had an old dad. He died 4 years ago. But my old dad would tell me tales. And back in 1964, 50 years ago, he was talking to me one day about the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, which had some of the richest farmland in the world. And yet they were under collective agriculture, which meant the government owned and controlled the land, and farmers didn't get to own it, they just worked it. And my father was upset in reading an article about how little they were actually producing because they had no incentive to produce. And I look at that and I think we should learn that lesson. As Ken Root said, those who ignore the past are doomed to repeat those failures. You know, if we look at that and you say, what happens to an economy when we lose the ability to own and produce and be profitable on our own? So that's an issue that, well, it doesn't really keep me up at night, but it's the issue that I judge almost everything else by. And I think it's worth fighting for.
Carol, thank you. So, and let me just say, it's a thrill to work with this group of people every day, and this is just a small representative group of the 65 people in our building. It is an amazing team to work with. So, Heather, you have a question for us. I can't see for the lights, but okay. Oh, we have a little mic issue here. So, Ken, lots of references to your comments today. So, yeah, it was profound.
Hello? Okay, now I'm on.
Okay, Heather.
All right. We have a variety of topics. So, about every other day, there is in the register a 2 cents worth concern about the environment, especially water, from the non-ag community. What can we say in response?
Well, I think we need to tell our story. We have a positive story. We need to tell it more and more and more. There's no doubt that farmers want clean water also. There's no doubt that we want our urban folks to support agriculture. You know, it's also chasing ink, right? That's the strategy that's going on. I call it chasing ink. So we just have to continue to tell our story. And we have a positive story. Everybody wants clean water. We're all Iowans. And we want the city of Des Moines to have clean water. And they have a treatment system that should operate efficiently, effectively. I use that water. I'm an owner of the Des Moines Water Works. The users of the water are the owners of Des Moines Water Works. So part of our message is we got to do this together. It isn't us versus them. We're all Iowans, and that needs to be part of the message. And you're starting to hear that. We formed the Iowa Ag Water Alliance with the Iowa corn and Iowa pork producers. So we're broadening the leadership table on this subject. We're coordinating our messages. We're just getting started with that. The mission of that organization is all about making the nutrient reduction strategy work, accelerating the adoption of practices. We have a lot of work to do, but we're doing it, and we got to communicate it. We also need to work with our people in our cities. And I'll tell you what, I'm working really hard to build relationships with city municipalities that want to work with agriculture. You're going to be hearing more about that. Cedar Rapids is really reaching out to agriculture. You're going to be hearing about some projects coming soon. So, you know, maybe we need to start our own 2 cents column and chase some ink. But I don't know, Aaron, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think it all starts, you hit on it, Roger, with do the first right, and farmers are. You know, it's easy to dwell on the negative and to dwell on the critics, because critics are easy to find, and they're often also the most vocal. But yet farmers are doing the first right. They are implementing practices on their farms to improve water quality. We have to continue to do those things. We also have to make sure that we should not be afraid to really have a heartfelt conversation with those who we are communicating to. As we said when the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance was launched, this is not another campaign telling people how important farmers are. This is an effort to have a real conversation, to embark on increasing the number of farmers and the number of practices that are deployed on farms to result in quantifiable and measurable water quality improvements. We have to admit that we're not perfect in agriculture. There are mistakes made. There is more that can be done. We have to be very truthful, very transparent about what's going on, because when we are, most people will listen objectively to that, and they are hungry for solutions. More and more people are growing weary and tired of the cave people, the citizens against virtually everything. It's time that the time is now where they want to follow a message of inspiration, of productivity, and that, you know what, we can rally behind this because farmers are putting their best foot forward. And maybe we will, you know, maybe it's a nickel column or something like that. But I would agree with Roger's assessment.
And one of the mantras at Iowa Soybean Association is we go where the data takes us, right? So we're not going to just tell a story or have a marketing plan. When you pull back the curtain, there's real data behind it. We can, you know, continuous improvement is another one of our mantras. So, you know, I think that we're positioned to maybe change the conversation.
Okay, question for Mike. What will be the top 1 or 2 issues that need to be addressed in transportation in order for U.S. soybean producers to maintain a competitive advantage against other soybean producing countries?
The list is long, but I would say, you know, one of our philosophies is that we really want to be, I mean, the danger, there's a lot of organizations that promote transportation issues, and you know, the temptation is to really occupy yourself at the 30,000 foot level and just talk about how woefully inadequate our transportation system is. I say those kind of statements all the time, but we really want to be known for very practical solutions that it may not be the elixir to all of our problems, but will it make tomorrow a little bit better than today? Those are the things that we really gravitate toward. It's one of the reasons why when you look at the inland waterway system, a lot of freight interests have talked about for years about we need to build new, we need to build bigger, and my response has always been, well, that would be nice if we did indeed have the funding available to do that. But you know, one of the arguments that I routinely make is that a predictably good inland waterway system is better than a hypothetically great one. We can spend all of our time talking about what our wish list is, but we need to really spend more time talking about what's likely, letting the economics actually talk to us a bit instead of us trying to impose our wishes on a reality that may not ever pan out for us. So things like emphasizing a well-maintained inland waterway system, a lock and dam system that may not be perfect, but at least it's serviceable. Things like that. Things like expanding semi-weight limits with an additional axle under the trailer. I mean, that's not going to solve all of our problems, but the fact that you can get some additional soybeans per truck, given the fact that we're not building a lot of new roads in this country, but yet we have an increased demand for trucking services in this country. And so supply is not keeping pace with demand. How can you extract more capacity out of the system so that we can remain viable into the future? So a number of these kind of, and there's a host of additional initiatives that we're working on, but all is really designed at moving that needle a little bit, making tomorrow better than today.
Okay, I have a question about ISA's stance regarding high oleic soybeans. Is ISA looking long-term with them, and what are we doing to promote high oleic soybeans?
You want to go first? So a number of us could answer that and should answer that question. I'll kind of hit it from the research side. So high oleic soybeans, especially those that are supported through the USB funding to DuPont Pioneer and Monsanto, have great potential. There have been some issues, certainly. But from a technological standpoint, you heard me talk earlier about opportunities with genetically engineered traits, or GMOs. High oleic would probably fit into what I would consider that second generation, right? Our first generation are primarily defensive traits, herbicide resistance and insect resistance and disease resistance type things. High oleic is an opportunity not only to enhance soybean market for food grade oils, but especially for industrial purposes. And so I think from a technology standpoint, I think the investment that we make with checkoff dollars, that can be debated whether that was a good thing or not, and I won't do that here. But from my perspective, I think that if we don't win with high oleic, we're going to have a really tough time with any real next generation transgenic beyond the defensive trait type things we're doing today. So from a technology standpoint, the industry chose high oleic. There were other choices potentially, but I think high oleic is an opportunity to show that biotech traits can do more for broader society than just help farmers grow crops in a more environmentally sustainable way.
You know, with high oleic, I think the opportunities are pretty vast, actually. We've got lots of opportunities. And you look at, we talked about listening to our customers and understanding their needs. That's what the customer is asking for products like this. We look at the trans fat labeling that occurred here over the last few years and how much demand we lost for soybean oil in the food sector, over 4 billion pounds worth of demand. Thank goodness for biodiesel, that helped offset some of that, but definitely if we want to regain some and capture some of these markets, we have to be responsive and continue to develop. So we'll continue to work on that. A colleague of ours, Linda Funk, who's the executive director of the Soy Foods Council, could probably answer this question the best. But I'll try to do my best here. I mean, certainly the food market, there's lots of opportunities. This product is more canola-like in its functionality, so that's going to be very critical. A lot of the food industry is reformulated away. There's a preference now for some of these various other oils, canola and other things. So if we can really continue to work with the food industry, recapture some of those markets, there's going to be a huge demand for this. On the industrial side, we've had research projects at ISA, and I know the United Soybean Board as well, looking at various value-added opportunities with high oleic. Asphalt, reformulating asphalt, bio-based asphalt materials is a good example of that. It's a project we're working with Iowa State University, has a lot of potential. These kinds of products, you know, you look at your cell phone case, that plastic cover, any of these polymer cases, anything you can do with petroleum, you can do with bio-based oils and soybean oils. So we're doing a lot of work and efforts in that area, and high oleic may make those products even better than just conventional soybean oil. So we'll continue to explore all these areas, and biodiesel too. It'll help increase the stability of biodiesel. So high oleic oil, I think, is for the most part, a win-win all the way around. I don't see any downsides. There's just lots of opportunities there.
And Grant, if I understand it correctly, in Iowa, we will have some opportunities in Northwest Iowa, specifically around certain processing plants. There'll be an opportunity in 2015 to grow some of those.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't want to speak too far ahead there, but you know, the processing industry and the seed industry are working those aspects out, and that's for them to kind of get to that point. But once they're there, then it's going to be up to us as growers to start embracing this and moving forward, because we got to have enough critical mass eventually of these acres grown to have a large enough supply to satisfy the market out there. Because if you just have a little bit, the market says, "Oh, talk to me later when you have more available."
Thanks. Heather.
I have another question, and this might be directed to you, Carrie. With a staff so large, how do you keep up with what is happening in other areas of the organization?
Well, it's communication. You see these folks, right? How bright they are. They're on top of the issues. We have a Monday staff meeting, and I'm sitting here. I sit here and I think, wow, if you could only see the Monday staff meeting, they're being so good here today. We have robust debates. We're on our best behavior today. So we have a lot of coordinating meetings. I mean, some will say we need a meeting-free day, right? But it takes a lot of coordination. Certainly, we're embracing technology. Donna Donovan, our CFO, is in the back that you all know. Donna has provided us with some new technology over the past year that's really helping us. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. I will tell you that I can't wait to get to work every day and work with this group of people and the others that are here in the audience and at the office. So we just keep moving, just like you do. We adopt new technologies. We continue to try to coordinate. We have to have continuous improvement as well as a staff, and so we're trying to be more coordinated. And so it's a real pleasure.
All right. We need to push railroads to be more timely in moving biodiesel so we don't lose markets. What does the next 6 months look like?
Well, there's been a lot of criticism of the railroads, particularly the last year. And, well, you know, criticizing the railroads has kind of been a sport for a lot of sectors ever since the history. The term railroading is not a term of endearment or a compliment, and we know where it's derived from. So we've had this troubling service, and it's been the function of a number of things. You know, one of which is there really has emerged a supply-demand imbalance when it comes to rail service demand and rail service supply. Certainly, one of the things that has exacerbated that is the dramatic increase in crude oil production in places like North Dakota. A statistic I commonly use is in the year 2009, U.S. railroads transported 11,000 carloads of crude oil. In the year 2013, they transported 400,000 carloads of crude oil. This also happens to be in the area of the country where it's witnessing one of the largest expansions of corn and soybean production. So there really is this, you know, quite significant supply-demand imbalance. And so one of the things about the railroads is you have a limited ability to address the situation because they are privately financed. And I would say of all of the modes of transportation, I would say the railroads, with all of their inadequacies, operate at a much higher caliber than our inland waterway system or our surface transportation system. If you were to have this kind of exponential demand increase for rail and the government was in charge of the rail sector, railroads right now are spending about $20 billion a year to kind of address demand. So if you would have had government in charge of our rail sector, the government would probably just be finishing appointing a blue ribbon commission to discuss how do you address this problem. The railroads have already spent billions of dollars to try to address it. So I think ultimately our philosophy with the Soy Transportation Coalition is if you have a problem with one mode of transportation, one of the most effective remedies is to try to stimulate the competing modes of transportation. And so that's one of the reasons why we talk about a well-maintained inland waterway system, expanding semi-weight limits, a lot of those type of things I think we really have more of an investment problem. We don't have a regulation problem. There's a number of organizations that think that the elixir to our problems when it comes to railroads is to impose more regulations on the industry. We don't subscribe to that. We have an investment problem. We need to stimulate it.
Thanks. I think we'll wrap up here. I have one more question for the panel. So, Kate, I think we have our next slide. Well, let's go to predictions. I love watching political shows. You know, there's always predictions, right? So let's go to predictions. Say this is the Iowa Soybean Review in December of 2024. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary. So in as few words as possible, I started to say 5 words or less, and then I looked at you all. In as few words as possible, what's the headline as we're celebrating our 60th anniversary? Carol, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I don't know if this is the headline on the Iowa Soybean Review. I'd really like to see it on the Des Moines Register. And I'd really like to see it after some public opinion poll and after everybody decides, like one of the panelists said before, you know what? At some point, people are going to get hungry. And I'd like the headline to read something like, "The public agrees. Farmers need freedom to farm."
The food conversation continues with a subhead, and farmers are leading it.
Oh, nice. Yep. Yeah. Okay, no pressure, Mike.
I think, yeah. Aaron, I can do that in 4 words. Name that tune. The headline I come up with is "Feeding More People and Doing It Better."
Okay, Grant.
The U.S. exports 3 billion bushels of soybeans.
Okay, so put that in perspective. Currently, we export.
We're exporting 1.7 billion bushels
So
of
in 10
soybeans.
years-
And then you got to keep in mind whole soybean meal as well. So between soybean meal and soybeans, I think we'll continue to grow. The world needs our products, and that's where the market is.
Great.
It's getting increasingly hard. As we, and earlier in rehearsal, I said, I agree with all you. But actually,
That never happens, just FYI.
it doesn't ever happen. That's right. That's right, Carol. Now,
The reason why I'm sitting here now.
that's right. So what I said earlier today is leadership. That's what it is. It's leadership.
So,
Oh, wow. That was just one word. Can you do it, Ed?
yeah,
Do it
nothing,
in a half a word.
nothing left. So I got to go with ISU wins national championship. So,
Now you're just playing to the crowd.
that's right. I would say global acceptance of American agriculture and technology.
Wow. Really great. Thank you. Help me in thanking the staff today. Again, I can't express what a pleasure it is to work for you and to be able to work with this team. Working for Iowa soybean farmers is an amazing, amazing opportunity for all of us. So thanks for your participation and the great questions from the audience. So we've had a great day. We've taken a look back with Ken, some of the good times, some of the bad times, and how we came out of it better. We got to hear from Governor Branstad and know that our leadership at the highest levels in this state are passionate about agriculture and that he's working hard to make our rural communities better. And get to hear Krista Harden's passionate story about why she does what she does, and that knowing that she's in DC with her voice, that's important. It was a great message to hear from her. So, but now, let's look forward to this evening's events. Sponsored by Rabobank AgriFinance. Rabo AgriFinance will be our reception that starts at 6 o'clock. This will be a great opportunity for you to reconnect with old friends. I know that there's a lot of connections going on already. I've seen out in the hallway people haven't seen each other for a long time, and to make new friends.